Excerpts from Maharaji's teachings about drugs. In India, there is a long tradition of the use of charas. Smoked in a chillum and mixed with tobacco, charas is used extensively by a large percentage of the millions of wandering sadhus. For those who are followers of the god Shiva, smoking is part of the religious ritual. For others of a devotional bent, it is used to accentuate the emotional fervor of the devotional practices. In his earlier years, when Maharaji was also a wandering sadhu, he undoubtedly sat in the jungle around many a fire with other sadhus and may or may not have used charas himself. And in his later years, although he himself did not use such things, he was supportive of those who did. In many instances, he helped sadhus to obtain charas or arsenic. He took a dim view, however, toward the use of hashish by householders, often directing at them a stream of abuse, or at least kidding and constant prodding about the matter. He said that it made them forget their responsibilities. For the Westerners, he generally discouraged the use of such drugs as hashish and opium as means for altering consciousness. Food is the best intoxicant. Love is the best medicine. However, to some of the Westerners who were genuinely pursuing the renunciate life of the wandering sadhu and who were habituated to smoking hashish for devotional practices, he did not discourage its use. Maharajji would even obtain charas for me. If a man came to Maharajji for darshan, Maharajji would ask him to hand over to me whatever charas he had. Maharajji filled many people's desires in this way, whether it was charas, money, sweets, whatever they wanted. Maharajji would be the agent to procure it for them. You should smoke hashish like Lord Shiva, only to be with God. Smoking hashish is not necessary. It does you no good to smoke. It only lasts a short while and it isn't good for the heart. Devotion to God is an addiction that lasts all the time. In his earlier days, Maharajji frequently visited a certain sadhu at his dhuni outside the city of Aligarh. This sadhu habitually smoked charas and ganja, along with any other intoxicant he could find. One day, he showed Maharajji a new drug that he said gave the most intense and blissful intoxication. Offering some to Maharajji, he warned that only the smallest amount was needed. But Maharajji took the whole piece and swallowed it all. Moments later, Maharajji fell unconscious and collapsed. The sadhu knew the remedy for overdose 4 kilos of milk, and when this was brought from the bazaar, he poured it down Maharajji's throat. Maharajji revived and sat up. Seeing the sadhu seated across from him, Maharajji slugged him in a moment of fury. You tried to kill me. He poisoned me. Hap, wicked person, he shouted as he ran away. In 1967, when I first came to India, I brought with me a supply of LSD, hoping to find someone who might understand more about these substances than we did in the West. When I had met Maharajji, after some days the thought had crossed my mind that he would be a perfect person to ask. The next day, after having the thought, I was called to him and he asked me immediately, Do you have a question? Of course, being before him was such a powerful experience that I had completely forgotten the question that I had in my mind the night before. So I looked stupid and said, No, Maharajji, I have no question. He appeared irritated and said, Where is the medicine? I was confused, but Bhagwan Das suggested, Maybe he means the LSD. I asked and Maharajji nodded. The bottle of LSD was in the car and I was sent to fetch it. When I returned, I emptied the vial of pills into my hand. In addition to the LSD, there were a number of other pills for this and that diarrhea, fever, a sleeping pill, and so forth. He asked about each of these. He asked if they gave powers. I didn't understand at the time and thought that by powers perhaps he meant physical strength. I said no. Later, of course, I came to understand that the word he had used, siddhis, means psychic powers. Then he held out his hand for the LSD. I put one pill on his palm. Each of these pills was about 300 micrograms of very pure LSD, a solid dose for an adult. He beckoned for more. So I put a second pill in his hand, 600 micrograms. Again, he beckoned, and I added yet another, making the total dosage 900 micrograms. Certainly not a dose for beginners. Then he threw all the pills into his mouth. My reaction was one of shock mixed with the fascination of a social scientist eager to see what would happen. He allowed me to stay for an hour, and nothing happened. Nothing whatsoever. He just laughed at me. The whole thing had happened very fast and unexpectedly. When I returned to the United States in 1968, I told many people about this acid feat. But there had remained in me a gnawing doubt that perhaps he had been putting me on and had thrown the pills over his shoulder or palmed them because I hadn't actually seen them go into his mouth. 3 years later, when I was back in India, he asked me one day, "Did you give me medicine when you were in India last time?" "Yes." "Did I take it?" he asked. Ah, there was my doubt made manifest. "I think you did." "What happened?" "Nothing." "Oh, Jao," and he sent me off for the evening. The next morning, I was called over to the porch in front of his room, where he sat in the mornings on a tucket. He asked, "Have you got any more of that medicine?" It just so happened that I was still carrying a small supply of LSD for just in case, and this was obviously it. "Yes." "Get it," he said. So I did. In the bottles were 5 pills of 300 micrograms each. One of the pills was broken. I placed them on my palm and held them out to him. He took the 4 unbroken pills. Then, one by one, very obviously and very deliberately, he placed each one in his mouth and swallowed it. Another unspoken thought of mine now answered. As soon as he had swallowed the last one, he asked, "Can I take water?" "Yes." "Hot or cold?" "It doesn't matter." He started yelling for water and drank a cup when it was brought. Then he asked, "How long will it take to act?" "Anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour." He called for an older man, a long-time devotee who had a watch, and Maharajji held the man's wrist, often pulling it up to him to peer at that watch. Then he asked, "Will it make me crazy?" That seemed so bizarre to me that I could only go along with what seemed to be a gag. So I said, "Probably." And then we waited. After some time, he pulled the blanket over his face. And when he came out after a moment, his eyes were rolling and his mouth was ajar, and he looked totally mad. I got upset. What was happening? Had I misjudged his powers? After all, he was an old man, and I had let him take 1200 micrograms. Maybe last time he had thrown them away, and then he read my mind and was trying to prove to me that he could do it, not realizing how strong the medicine really was. Guilt and anxiety poured through me. But when I looked at him again, he was perfectly normal and looking at the watch. At the end of an hour, it was obvious that nothing had happened. His reactions had been a total put on. And then he asked, "Have you got anything stronger?" I didn't. Then he said, these medicines were used in Kulu Valley long ago, but yogis have lost that knowledge. They were used with fasting. Nobody knows now. To take them with no effect, your mind must be firmly fixed on God. Others would be afraid to take. Many saints would not take this. And he left it at that. When I asked him if I should take LSD again, he said, it should not be taken in a hot climate. If you are in a place that is cool and peaceful and you are alone and your mind is turned toward God, then you may take the yogi medicine. LSD is good for the world but not spiritual. LSD allows you to come into the room and pranam to Christ, but after 2 hours you must leave. The best medicine is to love Christ. LSD is not the true samadhi. I had brought a picture with me of a boy who had died in America under strange circumstances. In 1968, he had come to see me in New Hampshire and had become one of my first students of yoga. He would come and visit each week, and he immediately absorbed everything I shared with him of what I had learned in India. I had eventually wanted to send him to Haridas for further training, but he had preferred to go to live in a cave in Arizona to continue his sadhana. I had taught him all I could, but he wrote me letters and checked in every few months during the winter of 1968-69. I didn't hear from him for a while and later learned that he had died in the cave. His mother has shared with me his final diary entries, which were most unusual. I suspected that the final diary entry had been written while he was under the influence of LSD. The story was that he had been found dead with blood coming out of his nose and that there was blood on the wall. Perhaps he had been doing pranayam and had burst a blood vessel. The entries were as follows. Ramana Maharishi and my Guru are both navigating my Mahasamadhi. No worry, I am in infinite bliss and will guide you from within. Write Ramdas and tell him the good news that I have no longer to undergo sadhana. I am there. Love, love. I know what is happening. Also, the Guru is with me inside. Know that I left the body completely identified with Jesus. Jesus está conmigo. Yo estoy en su corazón con Guru. I had promised his mother that when I was next with Maharajji, I would ask him about her son. At the appropriate time, I fetched what had been his high school graduation picture and handed it to Maharajji. He peered at it closely and then said, he is not in his body. That's right, Maharajji. He died from taking medicine. Aha, I thought so. This implied to me that he had not indeed entered true samadhi but had probably done pranayam while on LSD. But then Maharajji, apparently understanding my doubts, said, no, it is all right. He will not take rebirth. He finished his work. Now he is one with Christ. He loved you very much. He cried about you. Maharajji was silent for some time and then he added, you should tell his mother she should not worry. He is with Christ. He is watching over her. He finished his work. Maharaji had quoted exactly the words of the diary, and he had showed me that under certain circumstances, LSD could be the vehicle for returning to God. Then Maharaji sat silently with eyes closed. The moment was one of great power. I'd find the scene really indescribable when we were with him while tripping. The experience of seeing him sitting there, looking and talking, was as if there was nobody there at all. It was nobody playing a game of being somebody. That morning, described above by another devotee, was incredibly blissful. That whole day was like that. At the time of that acid trip, D had gotten Maharaji a new blanket, blue and yellow and red and green. I have a photograph of that colorful blanket. A lot of people were stoned on acid, sitting around the table, waiting for him to come out of his room. He almost leaped up on the table when he came. He had so much energy. Out he came. There he was. He poked some woman right in the front row in the chest and said, "Do you like LSD?" It was the first thing he said. He started laughing, and soon everybody was laughing. Then he got serious. Everybody started crying. It was as if he were pushing our buttons. At one point, everybody was crying, and he said, "What's all this crying? I can't stand crying. Stop all this crying." One dramatic LSD incident profoundly offended the sensibilities of Maharajji's Indian devotees. A young Westerner had taken LSD and had come to the temple with only a shawl wrapped around him. Then, as Maharajji was walking, holding the arms of two devotees, the young man came up behind Maharajji and attempted to embrace him from the rear. As he raised his arms to do this, his shawl covered the heads of the devotees and at the same time revealed the young man's nakedness. This incident, which might have seemed scandalous to an onlooker, was seen quite differently by the young man himself, as is indicated by the following dialogue between himself and another devotee who had been present at the time of the incident. S. Well, you know, my own experience with your trip that day was watching you grab Maharaji from behind. R. Yeah, I wanted to kiss him. I wanted to hug and kiss him. S. And Maharaji was laughing. You had covered Dada's face and whoever else was walking with Maharaji with your red blanket as you reached over to grab him from behind. You were naked under the blanket. Maharaji was all giggly and twinkling, wagging his head. When he went alone into his room, you went off to pranam to the sweeper. R. He was the lowest guy in the ashram and he was there on my way out. I was such a nobody, I didn't even have a body. And this guy was God. Standing there with a dirty broom, he had nothing, and I had to pranam to him. The sweeper was only about 12. You'd never notice him. He was always there, but really he was invisible. S. While that was going on, Maharajji was in his room, locked in there alone, but laughing a lot. I happened to be right there at the window. Maharajji was asking us all, "What happened? Why is he like that? What did he do?" I said, "Maharajji, I don't know." Then Maharajji said, "He ate too many jalebis." Then he started about LSD, asking, "Do you take it? Do you take it? Do you take it?" to all of us outside his window. There was one Westerner who said proudly, "Yes, I do." Then word came back that you had nothing on at all. There was silence for a while. Then, as we were all looking at Maharajji, he leaned right up against the screen of his window, looked straight at an Indian devotee, and said, "Naked." The shocked devotee put his hand over his crotch and hunched over a bit, exclaiming, "Maharajji." You were sitting outside, singing with everyone. Dada looked out and exclaimed, "There he is, it's him." Maharaji looked and said, "I don't know, I don't know, I don't think that's him." This went back and forth for quite some time. Dada would say, "I know it's him, I'm sure it's him." Maharaji just would not recognize you. Finally, after about 20 minutes, Maharaji said, "Well, maybe it is him." And then he called you over and told you to leave. R. Yes, it was translated as Maharajji says you're wicked and you must leave right away, I said. Okay, Maharajji, but I don't see how it could possibly have upset him. I saw him that day as very loving all the way through. When I was being carried out, I couldn't walk. I had no legs. I was in complete bliss. I felt as if I were being carried by angels. There was so much love all around me that I didn't feel any confusion. S. About a month later, you came back to the ashram for the first time after the acid trip. All dressed up in a dhoti with a vest, you came and joined the satsang, sitting outside the window singing. R. I don't know what he called me because my Hindi was really poor then. It was something that he always called Dada, something like Badmash but different. He said, Fool, Jao, and it blew my mind. I was so hurt. It was like the rejection of the ultimate lover. It was really painful. I staggered out of the ashram thinking, he can't do this to me. I'm going to come back a million times. But the incident created in me the desire to change myself. I started feeling guilty for things I had done when I was 2 years old. I was so full of remorse at what a badmash I was that I felt a kind of determination to win his love back. When I finally did get back in, after I went to Lama Govinda, I came back in with Anata. Everyone was sitting around and he was giving darshan. I was so afraid that he was going to throw me out, but I appeared very calm. He looked right at me and said, Did you come with her? I said, Yes. And he said, You came from Lama Govinda. Right. Then he said, How long? And he rolled his eyes back and looked away. And all of a sudden, he whirled back and looked right at me and said, Jao. And then some guy right behind me jumped up and ran away. I realized that he had yelled it right over my head. Then he looked at me and laughed. I was forgiven. After that, he looked at me several times and just laughed. It was just bliss. After this incident, Maharajji started saying, LSD causes one to become naked and dance around. And he called us all together in the back of the Kainji ashram. We were all sitting around in a big circle. There were perhaps 35 Westerners there. Maharaji went around to each person, naming them by name and asking, Have you ever had LSD? And everyone said, Yes, Maharaji. Every person. There was, in fact, only one of the group who hadn't had LSD, a Frenchman who had lived in Israel for some time. Maharaji thought about it for a while. He was just sitting there, meditating on it. Later that day, 4 young men came to the ashram. They had just come. Maharaji said, Doctor. I went into the office and he said, 4 young men have come. Go to the gate and evict them from the ashram because they have taken LSD. I went to the gate of the ashram and I said, Hello, have you guys by any chance taken LSD? The 4 of them said, No, we have never taken LSD. And I said, Excuse me, let me go check. I kept them at the gate and went to see Maharajji. Maharajji, they have never taken LSD. He said, Go kick them out of the ashram. They have taken LSD. I went back and asked them again. I said, Maharajji says you can't come in. You have to leave the ashram. You have taken LSD. They argued very vigorously. They said they'd never taken LSD. I went back to Maharajji and pleaded for them. I said, Maharajji, all of us have taken a lot of LSD and really, I've taken quite a bit. We've all had quite a bit of LSD. And he said, Those four boys have taken LSD. Go kick them out of the ashram. That's an order. So I went out and kicked them out of the ashram. They never came back. I don't understand anything about that incident. Excerpts from Maharajji's teachings about meditation and service. Maharajji often spoke about the value of meditation as a spiritual practice, and he himself appeared to be in a meditative state much of the time. Yet, he made it difficult for most of us to meditate while in his presence. But when we did, the effects were indeed dramatic. M started doing puja and meditation as instructed by Maharajji. Maharajji had given him a mantra and told him to start any way he wanted. It didn't matter. After some time, when M and Maharajji were traveling by horse drawn carriage, M asked Maharajji about the wandering mind during meditation. It won't stand on one point, but many ideas come in. What do I do? Then suddenly a small child ran across the road, and the driver pulled the reins to stop the horse just in time to save the child. Maharajji said, like that, pointing to the driver holding the reins. As the mind will travel here, there, and all directions, you should always try to pull it to one point. You should center it with continuous practice. Then automatically it will go to the one point on which you want to meditate. Ultimately, after years, the mind becomes quiet. One time, he called me into his office in Kainchi and had me sit up on the bed with him. I was under the impression in those days that meditation was something. And here I was with the Guru. It was, I thought, time to meditate, to really tune in. Not with words, but with, well, non reaction, Maharaji kept breaking down these false concepts of meditation. Each would fall away until finally there was nothing left, and I was just sitting there, feeling nothing transcendental, only emptiness. At that point, as soon as I got it, he jawed me. All the time he was talking to you, he was in meditation. You just felt it. When Maharaji sat with us, we could see that he was in a deep state of samadhi. With a nod of his head, he was off to a distant place. Another nod, and he was back again. We always felt this way about him, that he could be anywhere. This is what we saw, despite the fact that he totally hid himself. We couldn't help but see it. On one occasion, KK invited me to join him and his cousin ML in an evening drive out to Kainchi to deliver some lamps and supplies that had been purchased at Maharaji's instructions for a forthcoming holiday ritual. This opportunity was a delight, for never, when Maharaji was present, had I been allowed to be at the temple at Kainchi in the evening after the gates were closed. It was a quiet time of deepening dusk, and all was gentle and silent. Maharaji was sitting alone on his outdoor tucket when we arrived. ML and I joined him while KK went about his business of storing the things that we had brought. For once, there was no banter or conversation of any kind. This was what I had really yearned for, the opportunity to meditate in Maharaji's presence. For the constant drama of words and apples that usually surrounded Maharaji kept all consciousness focused on the physical plane. Although the yearning to meet him on the other planes was always strong and persistent, when the drama was in progress, I lacked the discipline to ignore it thoroughly and draw my mind within, to focus on the Agnya in such a way as to bring consciousness to other planes. Now all was silent. This was the opportunity. I sat in the lotus position and brought my attention to my forehead. Almost immediately, I entered into deep meditation and felt the physical plane drifting away. At this point, I was vaguely aware that Maharajji had suddenly lain over on his side and was snoring. I recall a vague surprise because from the position he was in, it seemed obvious that he was not really asleep. There was little time to reflect upon this, however, for suddenly my body was shaken by violent and powerful shocks of energy, which literally made my teeth rattle. The shaking seemed to grow in intensity, and the focus on my forehead faltered as the attention was drawn down to the shaking body. Immediately Maharajji sat up, turned to ML, and said, "Ask Ramdas how much money Stephen makes." I heard the words from a great distance and also heard ML's reply that he didn't want to disturb me because I was meditating. However, Maharajji insisted, and ML gently shook my knee. I could feel great resistance in me to coming down, and I tried to come down just enough to answer 30,000 a year, hoping to be allowed to go back up. But once down, the experience was over. It was, however, enough to show me that my discipline of mind wasn't sufficient to work with the huge energies that Maharaji could release in me with but a snore. Shortly afterward, we were jawoed. Just at the corner of the temple, I looked back. There sat Maharaji in his blanket in the darkness, immobile as a statue. There was something unearthly about him at that moment. It wasn't the Maharaji of the warm, intimate moments. It was the remote Shiva who sits atop Mount Kailash in eternal meditation. This was that aspect of Maharaji which, like the Himalayas, seemed vast and impersonal and touched a place of great depth and innocence within me. This was the force that drew me. It was love beyond love. Meditate to raise the Kundalini. Think about God. It will go right up. To see God, you have to have special eyes. Otherwise, you cannot bear the shock. Maharajji often foiled our attempts at meditation. Many times, when we'd be sitting there, someone would start meditating, and Maharajji would send over his two meditation spoilers. One was his driver, and the other a little boy who was the driver's friend. He would send them over to shake people out of meditation. One time, we were all sitting there and he said, "Okay, meditate." And after about a minute, he started telling jokes and making everyone stop. Another time, Maharaji called us into his office and told us to start singing. We started singing, but no one was really into it, so after a while it died down. And then he yelled from the other room, "Keep singing." We picked it up again, and it died down again. And he yelled, "Keep singing." And finally, after about 3 hours, the singing caught on and got really great. When it ended, everyone just naturally fell into meditation. And as soon as that happened, we heard from the other room, "Take dinner," and we were all ushered into the other room. We were never able to cling to that meditation space. On service. When asked why he was surrounded by so many badmash, Maharaj Ji said, "Only sick people come to a doctor." And like an old and trusted family physician, Maharaji was available day and night for his devotees, and he made house calls. Thus, Maharaji's own behavior was a perfect model for that sadhana he most encouraged in his devotees: selfless, loving service. For the householders who composed the largest percentage of his devotees, Maharaji did not generally encourage severe austerities, nor extensive meditation practice, nor complex rituals. Rather, he guided us to Karma Yoga, a way of coming to God through living life as an act of devoted service. In this way, Maharajji mirrored the teachings of the greatest devotional literature, as in the Ramayana, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Bible. But Maharajji made it clear that hard work alone was not the essence of the matter. Rather, it was work carried on with remembrance of God, that is, work done with love in the presence of God's grace. One man worked so hard in the ashram that he almost never had Maharajji's darshan. But late one evening it so happened that one by one all the devotees left and Maharajji was alone on his tucket. The man then went over to sit with Maharajji. Maharajji appeared surprised, since the man never seemed to have the time to have darshan. So Maharajji said to him, "What would you like?" The man merely answered, "Atmanyan," knowledge of the self. Maharajji replied, "Service to all is Atmanyan." Maharajji asked Hetsi how he thought a man succeeded in the world. Hetsi said, "By diligent, sincere work." Maharajji countered, saying that God's grace was also necessary. Without God's grace, no amount of hard work will succeed. Once I asked Maharajji how it is possible for a man to remember God all the time. He told me the story of Narada and the butcher. Vishnu was always praising the butcher, and Narada wondered why, since the butcher was always occupied and Narada spent 24 hours a day praising Vishnu. Vishnu gave Narada the task of carrying a bowl of oil full to the brim up to the top of a mountain without spilling a drop. The task completed, Vishnu asked how many times Narada remembered Vishnu. Narada asked how that would be possible since he had to concentrate on carrying the bowl and climbing the mountain. Vishnu sent Narada to the butcher, and the butcher said that as he works, he is always remembering God. Maharajji said then, "Whatever outer work you must do, do it. But train your mind in such a way that in your subconscious mind you remember God." Maharajji had often instructed me to remain alone, to have little to do with people, and at the same time to serve and feed people. Once I was staying in my room because he had said I should eat alone and not spend time with others. That night, a Western couple had a fight, and later Maharajji looked accusingly at me as he asked them, "Where was Ramdas? Why wasn't he there to help you?" I asked Maharajji about my sadhana, and he said, "To serve human beings is the only way for your salvation. You need not do dhyan or puja. Serve all living beings. Whoever works for God, his work will be done by itself. Work is God. Work is worship. The mind should always be engaged in work.